Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are going to start in a minute. So while we're waiting for everyone to join, if you could just go into the chat window and let us know where in the world you are joining us from. I know we have well over 800 participants, so just chat us where you are joining us from in the world. And we'll start in about 15 or 20 seconds as everyone is still joining the call, and we're a little early. Hello, Idaho, Seattle, Colorado, Brooklyn. Used to live there, Pennsylvania. If you're just joining us, please text us where you're joining us from. We're going to get started in a minute here, but we're just, as we do with Zoom, as you are all probably familiar, just giving people some time to arrive. And in the meantime, folks are just texting us New Zealand, great, across time zones. People are texting us where they're joining us from. Hello, Philippines. Great. Wonderful. So we have an international crowd. Please let us know where you're joining us from. We're going to get started here in about 30 seconds. It's 4 o'clock on the hour, just giving a few more people a chance to join. And we have different continents and time zones represented. So let us know where you're joining us from as we get started here. So welcome, everyone. My name is Rich Fernandez. I'm the CEO of the SIY Leadership Institute. It's a nonprofit educational institute originally started at Google that then separated as an independent entity from Google, really to train the skills of mindfulness-based emotional intelligence to communities and organizations around the world. And I am thrilled today to introduce our special guest, Golbie Kamarei, who's joining us as part of this thought leadership webinar series that we're offering for free and we'll be doing on an ongoing basis. And Golbie and I go way back. I think we met in Australia at a mindfulness conference in Australia. But let me tell you a little bit about Golbie and how much of a treat you're in for. So Golbie currently works as an advisor to Kamarei Advisory, working on well-being practices and wellness strategy. Formerly, she was the Chief People Officer at Culture Amp, which, as many of you may know, is an employee survey and intelligence and engagement platform. And previous to that, she spent a number of years, many years, at BlackRock. BlackRock, as you all may know, is the world's largest asset manager with over $7 trillion under management, assets under management. And Golbie had a really interesting role there because she was the pioneer and leader who brought in mindfulness practices across the firm. She launched what today is called BlackRock Mindfulness. And at the time, she was able to bring mindfulness practices to employees and really help foster these practices in 31 offices across 17 countries. With 1,500 employees at least participating. That was about 13% of the workplace participating in these practices. So Golbie has a very extensive background in thinking about these methodologies around mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and searching inside yourself. She has a great, robust presentation for you today, so I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to Golbie. One last bit of housekeeping. We are going to turn off the chat bar while Golbie is presenting because she has, like I said, a full presentation for you all. However, because there's numerous sections that are so robust, we invite you to chat in your questions, type your questions into the chat bar. We'll be monitoring that, and at the end of Golbie's presentation, then we'll be doing the Q&A section. So with that, my friend Golbie, welcome, and off we go.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Search Inside Yourself, and thank you to you as a community. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I wanted to start with this man. This is Professor Muhammad Yunus. He was the founder of Grameen Bank and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. And with permission, I wanted to share that this morning I had the very distinct honor of leading a meditation for an event that he had, a private event for his family, friends, and colleagues. To celebrate a milestone. And in preparing for that and in sitting on this call with some very impressive people, I really reflected on this man's life and remembered being exposed to him years ago when I would read his books. And I think in so many ways, he exemplifies what what we as a community are seeking to do, which is to have material and lasting impact in the world by seeing the humanity of people. And so Professor Yunus saw the humanity of the poorest of the poor and said, just because they're poor and they don't have external resources doesn't mean they're any less credit worthy, or they're any less capable, or they're any less reliable, or any less like hardworking. And so he started Grameen Bank, giving microloans, and essentially is the pioneer of microcredit and microfinance, and has changed the lives of millions of people, and doing it simply through the conviction that investing in people's humanity is the right way to build an organization, to build a system. He has this quote, which I love, and it says, "My greatest challenge has been to change the mindset of people. Mindsets play strange tricks on us. We see things the way our minds have instructed our eyes to see." And I thought that was so appropriate for this community, the Search Inside Yourself community, because this community itself is embodying the study of the mind, whether you're studying it through psychology or through, academia, or you're studying it and understanding it experientially by sitting and trying to understand the nature of the mind, understand the nature of thoughts. We are doing the work collectively that will hopefully allow us to challenge our own mindsets and beliefs, challenge our assumptions, our expectations, our own judgments, to go inward and do the inner work, so that if we do the inner work, we can have a deep and lasting impact in the outer world. And so it seems like, if you're not familiar with him, please look him up. He's fascinating. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my life, and it really has shaped the energy and the intention I have for today. It also makes me want to say a deep and sincere thank you to this community, the mindfulness community, the meditation, the yoga community, the business practitioners, the individuals who are daring to sit and search inside themselves, quite literally, and to have the courage to sit in discomfort, to have the courage to question, who am I? Who am I really? How do I want to show up? What matters to me? It takes so much perseverance and so much dedication to stay with that practice. But it's so beautiful, because if you do, then the likelihood is that when something arises, rather than going and attacking someone else, a system, you inquire within you. And in this world, in this climate right now, where there is so much anger and there is so much hurt and so many people talking at each other, we really do need to de-escalate the sense of emotion and the sense of aggression, and we can do that by going inward. So this is a way of saying thank you, and sharing one similar thought, which is, this quote's on my refrigerator. It says, "Give so much time to the improvement of yourself that you have no time to criticize others." And I fundamentally believe that this community is in that practice. So thank you for being in that practice. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? I organize this in two buckets, essentially context, how I define context, how I define leadership, and how I define crisis. And I wanted to put it in context for those of you who are also systems thinkers, who want to see the lay of the land, so you understand, okay, well, I want to focus on that, or I want to focus on that. And then I'm going to transition to something that's a little bit more tangible and tactical, and principles and actions. And I'm going to take it through three different buckets: leading ourselves, leading others, and then leading organizations. So let's take leadership in context. There are a lot of opinions on what leadership is and isn't. If you search, there are thousands or millions of responses and people who want to offer their point of view on what leadership is and isn't. And I guess you could say in this talk, I'm one of those voices. So I want to define what I mean by it. And to me, leadership is creating something that hasn't been created yet, forging a path that hasn't yet been paved, imagining a possibility that hasn't been conceived, and standing for something that hasn't yet been stood for. And the reality is, it's so many other things, and you probably as well have a definition, but some of us will manage projects and people. Some of us will lead movements and organizations, but all of us lead our own lives. And so I really want to stress that everyone is the leader of their own life. You are paving the way. You are standing for what you believe in. You are creating something that hasn't been created, which is in fact your life. And so I'm going to spend the majority of the time today on leading self, but I really just wanted to emphasize this point. And so to this point, if I say something that doesn't quite resonate, take it as a maybe a thought exercise, but if it doesn't resonate, feel free to ignore it and feel free to trust that voice within you that tells you how you want to lead your life. None of this is intended to be prescriptive. It's all meant to be an invitation and a suggestion. Another quote, and I only have one other quote after this, but this is another quote I just think exemplifies what I'm hoping to suggest for you all, which is, there is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It's the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will all your life spend your days on the ends of strings that someone else pulls. So, leading your own life. It helps to start with the question, what matters most to me and why? And my business school friends will get a chuckle because that's our entry level or our application essay, and it becomes a bit of a meme internally, but it really is a fundamental question. Another way of saying it is, what game am I playing? What game are you trying to play? Some people are playing the game of winning a lot of money. Others want to be an expert. Others want power. Some want to raise a family. Some want to live their soul's expression. Whatever game you ultimately want to play with your life, and maybe you want to play many, but there might be one overarching one, it's helpful to get clear on it. It's equally helpful to get clear on the signal of when you've won that. Is it when your name is on a building? Is it when you get married and have kids? And really to understand, what are you directing your energy and attention to? And then to ask yourself, what trade-offs are you making? Because we all make trade-offs. We can't do it all at the same time. So we make trade-offs based on our personal priorities. So identifying what matters, you are already in one of the best positions to do that if you are meditating, if you are reflecting. Another powerful tool that's tangible is you can write your own eulogy. I did that in 2014, and it made things start to get very clear for me in terms of how I wanted to dedicate my life, my energy, my time, my resources. And then you can also experiment. Again, we're just setting the foundation of how to think about leadership from my lens, so you understand where I'm coming from. Set the foundation. You can understand the foundation by doing the opposites. One month, I did this exercise where I did the opposite of what I would normally do. I said no when I normally said yes. I said yes when I normally said no. And the intention was to uncover what was actually authentic to me, what really mattered to me, so that I could start to get rid of distractions and focus on what was meaningful. Once you identify what matters, then in my mind, one of the most important things is to build integrity around that. So what does that mean? To me, that means alignment. It's alignment of your values with your thoughts, with your intentions, with your words, with your actions, with your reactions. And when you are out of alignment, you simply course correct. And you don't have to be perfect. There's no such thing. But if you can know what you're working towards, know what game you're trying to win, know what success looks like to you, and you can build integrity around it, then you can be amazingly powerful in your life and in the impact you're trying to have. So again, just to recap, in my view of leadership, you are the leader of your own life. Others may manage people or projects or lead organizations, but you are in fact a leader. And one of the most important things is to find the genuine in yourself and don't lose it. And don't let it get crowded out with other people's opinions, because they are going to give them to you, and they're everywhere. Getting clear on how you define success and what trade-offs you're willing to make. In periods of massive disruption, you have an amazing opportunity to reevaluate what truly matters. When you're clear, then begin the process of strengthening your identity, your integrity, your actions. Do they align to your words? Do your words align to your intentions? Do your intentions align to your thoughts? Do your thoughts align to your values? And when they're out of alignment, you simply course correct. Ultimately, I believe it's all an inside job first, and you should lead from within. And the stronger the integrity to your end game, the more impact you can have in the external world. This is where I think of Professor Yunus. And ultimately, you define you. And this may mean that through the process of sitting, through the process of understanding the nature of the mind, is starting to examining the contents of some of your beliefs and your thoughts, you realize, hey, that thought doesn't serve me. Or that belief, that thought that I thought so much that it's now a core belief, that doesn't serve me. That was something else that someone imparted upon me. And we really need to discern when we want to internalize people's opinions and feedback, and when we actually want to lead from within. I would say, just in, given the current climate, minority groups tend to have a lot of things projected onto them, a lot of ways of, hey, you need to act like this, you need to talk like this in order to acclimate. So sometimes it's slightly more work for people who aren't part of a majority subgroup to undo the voice of others. Let's talk about crisis and context. And in this instance, I'm going to introduce a framework that we're going to use throughout the rest of the talk. So I call it the crisis spectrum. Right now in society, these are all the things, or just a fraction actually of all the things going on. We have a global pandemic, we have massive unemployment, we have defunding of global orgs, closed borders, gun violence, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, political tensions. These are happening at a societal level. They're systematic at a societal level. But then we have things happening in the organizational level that are equally systematic, just slightly more narrow in scope. We have sick and dying colleagues, company layoffs, reduced runway for the operations of the business, politics, pay reductions, massive stress, working from home, you're on Zoom all the time, informational silos now that you're not all together, blowback from certain companies' crisis response. And there's more. There's also what's happening at home within your family system, the more intimate system. People are losing loved ones. Families are separated. People are suffering alone in hospitals. There's financial strain as people lose jobs. People are having personal illnesses that are getting exacerbated by all the stress. You have disabilities arising. Domestic violence is increasing. Suicide's actually increasing as well, I learned yesterday. Stress in relationships. People are homeschooling their kids and they've never thought they would do that. They're isolated. Some people haven't had a hug in months. And then there's what's going on the inside, right? So we talked about the inside job. People have all these thoughts and some of them are alarming. Some people have a lot of strong emotions and some of them are really intense, whether it's shock, fear, grief, anger, rage, or it's, am I gonna get sick? Am I gonna die? What's gonna happen? And so within each of these buckets, you could have very low exposure to these things and therefore maybe very low impact, or you could have high exposure and high impact. And everyone's gonna fall somewhere differently on this spectrum, depending on what they have proximity to. The first three at a society, organization, and family level are really external. They're happening external to you. The last column is really about what's happening internally. So soon we're going to talk about how do we lead others and organizations, which fall under the external bucket, and then how do we lead self, which falls under the internal bucket. The way I conceptualize it is, let's take that external conditions, right? The society, organization, and family, and you put them on a spectrum from anything that's chaotic to things that are more stable. And in a chaotic context, you might have anything from danger to unpredictability to limited and scarce resources to strained relationships. On the stability side, it's really the opposite. There's safety, there might be an abundance of resources, things might be more predictable, you might have supportive relationships, some really clear routines and boundaries. And we want to map that across with the internal quadrant, that last column. And that can also range from chaos to stability. So in a chaotic sense, if what's going on with you internally is really intense, you might be in massive stress response. You might have negative emotions at an extreme level, negative thoughts. You might have triggers, and some people are absolutely dealing with trauma right now. On the flip side, some people might be out slightly more stable on the internal experience. They might have a more regulated nervous system, more neutral or positive emotions, and they might come from a viewpoint of the world is abundant. What we're going to do is take this model, and each quadrant has its own characteristics. I call when you're externally and internally in chaos, I call that survival mode. When the external world's in chaos, but you're a bit more stable or grounded, I call that service. When you're in chaos, but the world's a little bit more stable, I call that growth. And finally, when your external conditions and your internal conditions are both on the more stable side, I call that build. And we're going to take these quadrants and explore them in more detail through the leading self section. So crisis and context, just to remember, it's playing out in the external arena and the internal arena. And there is a spectrum of exposure and impact. And it can range from really negligible, you know, some people going out and wanting to party, to really debilitating when your loved one is in the hospital with COVID. People's preparedness and readiness for this moment will vary, and it will vary greatly depending on the unique circumstances of their life. Some people might be utterly shut down in this moment and passive because they're highly triggered. And some people might be more resilient and solution oriented. And we have to be careful not to judge, because we don't know what people's experience is. We don't know what their internal conditions are unless they share. I think this moment, this crisis, this multiplicity of crises is an opportunity to humanize. Because when something happens that is external and natural, whether it's a flood or a fire or a pandemic, it has the ability to humanize us. Because then we relate as human beings as opposed to one identity to another identity. And when we need each other, when we realize that our collective humanity is necessary in order for us to survive and thrive, we tend to open up a little bit more and be a resource to others. I think it's worth noticing, but I'm sure it's very obvious, that we can bridge our internal and external conditions. Our internal reality is our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations in our body. Our external, the way we navigate our external, is through our words and our actions and our facial expressions to some extent, how we use our body. And we can, again, if we're trying to build integrity, we can create alignment there. So there is a sense of authenticity. There is a sense of integrity. When someone speaks, you know where it comes from. That is particularly helpful in crises, because in crises, remember, the conditions are unpredictable, people are confused. So the more we can be a person of integrity, the more it can help those around us. Okay, so let's talk about leading self. So we have this matrix, and we know that everyone's a leader in their own life. We know that the experience of your life is an interaction of the internal and the external. We know that depending on this interaction of internal and external, the nature of our words, our actions, our reactions will range, right? Depending on what quadrant you're in. And we also know that a strong foundation of integrity will allow us to show up with authenticity in the pursuit of what matters most to us, no matter what context we're in. Now, let's say that you are in survival. Well, as the world evolved, you might be bopping all around. In fact, that's the reality of most people I know. This either happens over the course of weeks, or it happens over the course of months, or it could happen over the course of days as things change. And so let's take that each quadrant by quadrant, and let's start with survival mode. And I'm actually going to stay in survival a little longer than the others, because almost every single person I know right now is not great. Everyone's just kind of okay, and some are really struggling, and many are in survival. And I know that because they tell me. They look at the framework and they say, actually, this is hugely helpful because it lets me name it, and it lets you know how to respond to me, and because that you know that I'm in survival. So the opportunity when you're in survival mode is to uncover what needs of yours are unmet, what values are compromised, and what boundaries have been overrun. That's the internal work that you can do when you're in survival mode. Externally, you can also uncover what might be a poor fit, what might be dysfunctional or abusive. Some at the extreme, some people are in survival mode because they are in a condition that isn't validating their articulation of what they're experiencing. And so they're getting gaslighted. And so that can be terrible. The challenge and the tension in this quadrant is really this trade-off of, do I take care of myself or do I take care of my responsibilities and others? And I see people struggling so much. Like, I can't slow down long enough to take care of myself because I need so much help right now. So I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going, which is a great way to burn out. Another tension in this is the public-private. Like, can I tell people that I'm actually struggling? Maybe they will judge me. Maybe they will think that given XYZ, I have this resource, or I'm in this position, I don't have the right to struggle as a person. And it's amazing how we can judge other people and strip away their humanity to the range of human experience. The other tension or the challenge of being in survival mode is the attribution of to character versus situation. Like, oh, does this mean I have a weak character? Or does this mean that the situation is so untenable that it completely overrode my threshold of resilience? And people can feel like it's a character ding if they talk about what a hard time they're having. The inquiry here that's really, I found helpful, is to say, okay, what is happening in the here and now? Or what is immediately needed from me, or specifically needed from me, like very literal. Because that actually can reduce the amount of overwhelm, the emotional overwhelm, because you're just like, okay, What's literally needed is I have to sit in this chair and I have to listen to this person speak. I have to process their words, and then I have to get up and I have to go to the next room. And so that can start to allow your body just a little bit of space to start to regulate itself. Another helpful inquiry is, what needs of mine aren't being met? Because that's people that are especially mission-oriented or service-oriented generally, that are dealing with crisis and want to keep doing their job well or want to keep helping others, they sometimes ignore their own needs, and they can do this for a long time. And so it's good, just inquiry, what's not getting tended to me, that's keeping me below the line and kind of in this survival stage. The mindset that can be very helpful here is, this too shall pass. I know all of us have heard that phrase, but when things start to pile on, whether it's another thing that you're reconciling with internally or another thing falls apart externally in the world and you think, oh my God, can 2020 get any worse? This too shall pass. This too shall pass. And then a phrase that I have sometimes used is, okay, today's a get through the day kind of day. Like, I'm not curing cancer. I'm actually never curing cancer because that's not my profession, but I'm not doing anything very admirable or impressive. I am just going to get through the day and go to bed and start again tomorrow. And that can also take the pressure off people so that they just can get through the day with a little bit less self-judgment. Micro actions here are just about soothing your body, getting your nervous system into a state of regulation, breathing, stretching, drinking water, sleeping, asking for help. Focusing literally on what you need to do, it can reduce a lot of the pressure. And looking for opportunities and situations where you can exert control or empower, feel that sense of empowerment yet again.
Well, be talking about the survival mode, right? Because you mentioned this earlier, but we each can cycle through or reside in a survival mode for different durations. Is that right?
Yes.
Your model? Yeah.
Yes. And so I will get to the others as well. Is that helpful?
Yes, very helpful. It's just knowing it's kind of a dynamic model, because I think some of us have experienced this mode perhaps like in shorter bursts, and some of us have experienced it for a whole life for a whole variety of reasons. But
yeah, absolutely.
The notion that it varies by individual, by your experience, like you said, crisis in context.
Absolutely. No, that's a great clarification and distinction. And you'll notice that some of these things will apply to the other quadrants as well. And so it's helpful, hopefully, that if you happen to be in survival mode where it is really, things can become myopic because you're just thinking, okay, what's the next thing I need to do? Just to have a few bullet points. I won't read through all these, but this is recorded, and if it's helpful, you can refer back to it. These are some more micro actions to just start to take care of your body if you're in survival mode. Some of these books have been helpful to me, quite honestly, in the past as I've dealt with the various challenges of my life. And they can help when people are slightly in a more existential crisis. I've had many people in my life pass away, and these have always kind of helped me to make sense of the nature of life. Let's talk about service mode. So this is when your world the external world is still in crisis, but you're slightly more resilient to it. And I don't use that as resilient to it for a number of reasons. We can tend to think that deify people who are highly resilient under crisis, but there could be a lot of reasons why they're that way. So the opportunity here is really to understand how you're relating to your external conditions. And what about it? What are you saying to yourself that is allowing you to stay grounded when things might be falling apart? It's also an opportunity to help others navigate this time that might not have the internal resourcing that you have. There's a tension when people find themselves in service mode. And again, it could be in the course of a day. It could be over a period of your life when your external conditions aren't triggering you, and so you're able to stay calm. The tension here is in the service of others, you can sometimes deplete yourself and pop right back down to survival. You can also fall into the hero complex where you think you're more virtuous or because you're navigating this challenging situation well. And so it's over attribution to kind of yourself as opposed to maybe the situation. And it's there's a challenge here. There's a tendency to look at people who are below the line in survival or growth as though they're broken or needing fixing and wanting to do for them rather than guide them, which is really quite unfair to them because nobody is broken. The inquiry, what meaning am I giving this that's contributing to my resilience? How might I support other people professionally or personally? The mindset is I'm in a position where I might help others. And the micro actions, oops, I've really just copied that again. So I will get back to you when I remember what the micro actions were for this mode. Growth. The opportunity here is to look inward. This is when you're processing a lot, but the external conditions look pretty stable. There's not a pandemic. You're not getting divorced. You didn't just lose a child. Your work situation hasn't been disrupted. When things are kind of status quo, but you're still struggling. So the opportunity here is really for you to grow. It's to look inward to better understand how you're relating to your environment. The challenge and tension here is sometimes there's a need to justify yourself because you're struggling, but no one else looks like they're struggling. What's wrong with me? It's kind of get away from that thought. That's really, self-aggressive. But sometimes we feel like in order to justify, we need to reveal more than we're comfortable revealing. And it can actually be receiving a judgment or a lack of awareness and compassion from others who aren't struggling. And that can be hard to hold. You can ask yourself, what can I learn here? What meaning am I giving this? And what trade-offs am I making that are potentially putting me in this position where I'm struggling, even though certain things are stable around me? A mindset that's helpful is recognizing I can tolerate this discomfort. And again, micro actions are going to be looking for situations where you have control and choice to build up that power. That's the same thing in survival mode. It might be confiding in a trusted friend or colleague and asking them to support you as you navigate responsibilities. And finally, build mode. It's when the external world is pretty calm or stable. Their internal world is calm and stable. And here is really when you have a lot of opportunity to proactively build and create without the additional challenges and stresses. You can push the edge of your comfort zone. You can take risks. You can experiment with your role at work without compromising your well-being. So maybe some of the things you might have learned from the growth mode. The challenge is you might actually have a lack of awareness or compassion for people who are in the same conditions as you, but deeply struggling, because you might not see what they're dealing with. And you might over-identify with your good fortune. Again, that attribution bias. Am I like, I'm so awesome because I'm navigating this situation well, or am I lucky? The inquiry is when you can start to do that really deep, who am I? Who am I really? You're no longer surviving and like trying to stem the bleeding or just get things under control. You can do that deeper inquiry. What matters most to me? What makes me come alive? How might I cultivate more integrity? The mindset here is also this too shall pass, but this is for humility. In survival mode, it was this too shall pass because that was for comfort and that let your nervous system ease. When you're all is good, it is good to remind yourself that this also isn't forever. So you're not shocked when things change because things are always changing. I'd like to say I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, and that might be helpful as well. And the little baby micro actions in this moment are counting your blessings and building healthy habits for when you pop back down to growth or to survival or even to service. So ultimately, your well-being is up to you. And I'll share personally, my greatest points of suffering in my life have been when I've neglected my needs, values, boundaries, intuition, and judgment, when I just haven't prioritized that. It is an iterative process of growth where an event will happen, whether it's an internal event or an external event. We can do an audit. What am I thinking and feeling in response to this event? What's in my control, my external conditions? What's out of my control? And then think about, how do I want to take action? Do I want to change my internal conditions? Do I want to change my mindset? Do I want to change my relationship to my external conditions? Or do I want to go out in there and change the conditions, change the system? And you see a lot of that happening. And sometimes you have to do a little bit of all of it. And ultimately, because it's iterative, sometimes none of those things are really getting you the outcome that you want and your well-being is struggling. And so when in an effort to lead yourself through your life as only you can do, you have to ask for help. And then you just repeat. You rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. So remember, take care of yourself. In times of crisis, work can be all-consuming. Self-care is the foundation of sustainable leadership, and if you ignore it, you likely will burn out. And I know that this happens to many, many people. And most people don't learn the lesson the first time. They have to learn it a few times. Also, play the long game. Every scenario has its opportunities, its challenges, its tensions. It's about employing the strategies and actions that best serve the mode you're in, and recognizing that you're going to bop around. You're going to change modes. Knowing that your well-being is yours. So really investing in understanding what you need, what you value, where your boundary is, what your intuition's telling you, what your judgment's telling you. In complex situations and in crisis, we tend to want to implement complex solutions, but really sometimes we just need to start small and simple. You know, just take a breath, get a good night's sleep, sit for 5 minutes, do the little things, because ultimately they start to tip the scale back into a place where you can control things and you can start to exert influence in the direction of the life and move your life in the direction you want it to go. And ultimately looking for teachers and role models. I put in this note, again, given the climate that we're in, that sometimes the people who have been most ignored, most dismissed, most oppressed have the most resilient spirits and the most generous hearts, because they've endured so much and they've had to keep picking themselves up off the ground and keep showing up. And so as a community, there is a lot that we can learn from people that we might not normally expect. So I would open your mind to who might be a good teacher for you or a good partner. Leading others, all right. So remember this, you know, just a normal Tuesday. Now, imagine if someone else is going through something and now someone else is going through something and you have a whole lot going on, right? Now multiply that by everyone in your organization. No matter what your organizational structure is, it's made up of people and it's complicated because everyone's going through their own cycle. And then you add some power dynamics, some personal agendas, a whole bunch of stress, politics, expectations, projections, diversity, people who want to bring their whole self to work, people who are like, please don't bring your whole self to work because then I'm going to get your unresolved marriage stuff. And it's like chaos sometimes. And it's actually fascinating that anything can get done in organizations. It's amazing. And so when we think about leading others and we think about the different personas and the fact that we might all be going through something at different times, we really just need to create the space for personal difference, recognizing that we can't really ever know what's going on and what it feels like to be in someone else's body or someone else's mind. And we don't necessarily know the details of their family system or even their extended community. So creating space for difference. But if we're leading others, we want to set people up for success. I pulled this from the Google manager behaviors of what they found was the most successful. And if you look at those, that does sound like an awesome manager. And I don't know that I've ever met anyone who has all those characteristics, displays all those behaviors all the time. If you do great, you're lucky. I think it's aspirational and we all probably exhibit at times. I think in these times of crisis, it's really important to clarify the expectations of managers, for managers and for the people they work for, that report to them and for that they work for. Because a manager's role can be accountable for other people's work product, but it also can be the emotional first responders. It could be a coach for you in your career. And it's really in this moment, people are showing up to work and they're potentially wanting something from their manager that their manager might not be expecting to have to offer, because people are going through so much and because they might not have support systems outside of work. So it's really important to clarify with the people that you manage. And it's important to realize that your leadership style may not match what every person on your team needs. Remember, everyone here was going through their own thing. If this manager is in survival, she might not be the best manager for someone in build, and vice versa. At a macro view, if we're looking at an organization, in survival mode, one of the most helpful things you can do when you're leading others is to share your intention, because you might just mess up the language. And if they're in survival mode too, you can really start to hurt each other without intending to. So you could say, my intention in this meeting is to support you. What I really need to figure out is how to do, and just share your intention, share where you're coming from. So if you mess it up, you potentially get a chance to redo it. It's good to calibrate your expectations and to ask for support, both of the people that you report to, your peers, but also the people who report to you. It's very likely that everyone wants everyone to do a good job. If you're in service mode, you may want to just bear witness to people who are struggling, bear witness to people who need to be heard. You don't necessarily have to have the solution, because you might not, but you can be there and listen. You can also just ask the simple question, how can I support you? And you might ask for yourself, where can I step up on behalf of others? If you're down in growth and you're struggling and the situation seems more stable than in chaos, you might delegate some of your responsibilities, create opportunities, or ask for support. And if you're in build mode and you're leading others, get curious, experiment, give stretch assignments. And if none of those things work, then go back to basics. This is how I think about interpersonal dynamics, is really the foundation is respect. Do I respect this person generally? Do I respect them as a human being? Just their humanness, no matter what shape they are, what size they are, what age they are, what nationality they are, what religion they are. Can I respect them generally as a human being? And then can I respect them specifically for who they are, specifically for the path they've walked, specifically for what they've learned and their resilience and their courage and their strength. And if there is that foundation of general and specific respect, then it's about trust in my mind. Can I trust their intentions? Can I trust that they have good intentions, that they're doing X, Y, Z for the right reasons to be determined by each person? Can I trust their execution? If they say they're going to show up, are they going to show up? If they say they're going to deliver the report, are they going to deliver the report? Some people don't need both. Some people don't care what your intentions are as long as you deliver the outcomes. I don't care how you get that done, just get it done. Some people need both. If you have that respect and you have that trust, then it's about communication skills in many ways. It's, can you listen? Can you empathize appropriately? Can you reflect back? Are you feeling that from the other person? And so if when you're leading others, you're finding that there is a mismatch, you have misaligned expectations, you have, you don't necessarily know you don't know how to have influence, you're in survival mode, you can't, necessarily be there for your people in the way you want, you can come back to this basic pyramid and recognize that stress is going to throw this off. So when in doubt, you can then also go back to the Gottman magic ratio of 5:1. And you can look up Gottman's research, and it was mostly in the context of marriage, but it found that for every negative interaction, a relationship could survive and thrive if it had 5 times as many positive interactions. And in these times of crisis, where people are making hard decisions, there are layoffs, they're stressed out, they're taking it out on someone accidentally, we have to intentionally go back to basics, remember our respect, remember our trust, remember our basic communication skills, and we need to intentionally create those positive interactions so that the people who report to us and the people around us can bear the more negative or stressful ones. Here are some scripts that you can use if you're trying to have conversation. Ultimately, the key thing is to see, as Muhammad Yunus does, the humanity behind the role. Everyone is human and has human needs, independent of their role at work, whether they're the boss or not. Their role might have its own needs, but that's not the human being. We can't conflate it, and so many people do. They over-identify potentially with their role at work, and that does a disservice to them. So remembering, in crises, work conditions become more complex, and then the work identities and responsibilities can be conflated, and work can eclipse the human being. And I tend to see this being especially true for mission-driven people who will burn themselves out in the pursuit of something greater than themselves. Recognizing each other's humanity is foundation for leading others. Honoring each other's boundaries and needs. Understanding your role and the context of the organization with regard to others. Your role as a manager. What are they expecting of you? What's reasonable? Knowing your limitations and communicating that. When you can't, know what you can't offer as a manager. If you can't be there for someone, that's where one of the scripts is I want to support you, but I'm having a hard time. Can I help you find other resources? Allows us to calibrate a little bit more openly with where people are. And ultimately, doing the inner work so that you can best support others in the outside world. Leading organizations. All right. So every organization, especially right now, is trying to take care, well, hopefully every organization is trying to take care of their employees, serve their clients, invest in their community, remain a going concern, stay in business, and continue to grow and scale. And that's hard. Those are hard things to balance because they're natural tensions. No matter what your org structure or product, they're natural tensions in business. Do we focus on the business or do we focus on the people? Do we focus on for the here and now or do we build for tomorrow? Do we decide quickly and move fast, or do we get everyone's point of view and make them feel involved? Do we focus on short term or build for the long term? And these are natural tensions that always exist. You can add additional constraints to this of how limited are our resources? How much diversity do we have? What are the different norms? And you realize things can be really challenging when you're trying to lead organizations in times of crisis, because so many people do want to jump into action, and that can just create a lot of noise and tension. So here's what I would suggest, is really to find the nodes of influence within the system. Who has outsized impact on the organization or the system based on their role, their formal role? They might be a boss of many, or a C-suite person, or they just have a central role, a connector role. Or they might have an informal influence. Maybe they're a cultural leader. And find those individuals and create support and leverage for them. So basically, you're trying to lever the system up so that it can be more efficient, more productive. It can achieve its goals through the most potentially efficient use of support. I'm not saying not everyone deserves support, they do. But if resources are constrained, if you're trying to balance that tension, that $1 extra, does it go to people or business? People or business? Look for where you can have outsized impact. Real quick, and then we'll open it to questions. In leading organizations, again, in this quadrant system, in survival mode, massive prioritization. In crisis, you naturally have to prioritize, but when you're in survival mode, you probably can't handle that much. Your threshold has been superseded with stress. And so figuring out prioritization, figuring out and helping others know what the escalation channels are, building support networks and scenario planning is hugely important, so that you don't have to do all the thinking when something arises. You've thought of it ahead of time. If you're in service and you have the capacity, this is when you can build, establish routines and create clarity for others who might be looking for it. You can be decisive and predictable for the system. They might need that. And you can use a skillful empathy to ease people's experience. If you're in growth mode, this is a good time to codify your own learnings, to build playbooks for the future. You're learning, the system is generally stable, the organization's stable, it's not trying to fight for its own survival, but you're having a hard time. What am I learning here? How can I write it down so I can learn, so I can apply this next time? And then if you're in build mode and you're leading organizations, this is a great time to experiment, challenge status quo, reduce debt. Really, again, bolster the organization for when things might move down below the line into survival or growth. So leading organizations, again, it's a multi-pronged approach. It's systemic change needs the individual, the intrapersonal, the group or the team, the interpersonal, and the organizational system level efforts. And it's iterative. Remember that process. You want to look for the nodes of influence and create leverage in the system where you can. Communication is critical when you're in an organization that's dealing with disruption, and scenario planning is hugely important. A final thought, and then we'll open to questions. I started out talking about success and defining success as really the beginning core for how you show up in the world, how you build your integrity, how you go out into the world, how you respond to the world, how you lead yourself and then lead others and then lead organizations. I wanted to share with you a quote that I read maybe decades ago that had a huge impact on me in terms of how I define success. And it's from an actor named Ray Fiennes. And it says, "The people I consider successful are so because of how they handle their responsibilities to other people, how they approach the future, people who have a full sense of the value of their life and what they want to do with it. I call people successful not because they have money or their business is doing well, but because as human beings, they have a fully developed sense of being alive and engaged in a lifetime task of collaboration with other human beings, their mothers and fathers, their family, their friends, their loved ones, the friends who are dying, the friends who are being born. Success is all about being able to extend love to people, not in the big capital letter sense, but in the everyday, little by little, task by task, gesture by gesture, word by word." So with that, thank you. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Golbie. That was, as you said, really a robust, incredible presentation. We have a number of questions floating in, so we'll go straight to that. The first one that came in was, there was an ask if we'll be sharing the slides, and we won't be sharing the slides, but we will be sharing the recording. As you can imagine, Golbie is kind of working this into a larger body of work, which you should look out for in the future, whatever form that takes. But you will get the recording for those of you on this call. Okay, a number of other questions. And I think we have from, and you can see this in the chat bar as well. I think Aubrey had a question. I don't see it in the chat though. But let's look at some of the other questions. If you can just send it through. There is a question about sort of quantum physics, consciousness, kind of the nature of mind. That's a huge question. We have in the next 10 minutes time to answer it. I think one key thing that really flows through every category that you shared with us is the notion of awareness. And maybe you could call it mindfulness, you can call it awareness, you can call it consciousness. Maybe could you comment on that? Is this something that we can cultivate on an ongoing basis? I think I know the answer to that question. What do you think?
I think absolutely. Absolutely we can cultivate it. Absolutely it's at the root of so much. The way I conceptualize it is it all starts with awareness. What is happening right now, and what is my interpretation of what's happening? And from that awareness, we often sometimes meet resistance. And we go, oh, no, I don't want to, that's not what it is. And you're like, actually, no, it is what it is. And my interpretation is what it is. And once you can work through the resistance, you get to the stage of acceptance. That's how I call it, where you accept that it is what it is. I'm aware of what is. I'm aware of my interpretation of what is. I've worked through my resistance. I can accept what is. And a lot of people, they feel stuck at acceptance because they think they're condoning bad situations. Whereas when you get to this point of acceptance, then you actually have an ability to identify, okay, what do I control and what can I change? And then you can show up to your life or your world with intention that's aligned with what matters to you. But it really does start in awareness and being able to see what is, see that as separate from your interpretation of what is. Work through your resistance that might get in the way of you accepting it as it is. And then once you can accept what is, then you're granted permission. Then you have the opportunity to ultimately decide how you want to show up to that.
Okay, great, thank you. A couple of other questions specifically on your presentation, a comment about the quadrants, and that this participant asks that in working with leaders of 20 years, most experienced leaders activate their support network, not build it. And so I don't know if I have a different understanding of that, because I thought what you were presenting was it's a build phase where you're directing your energy toward building, investing, creating capability rather than building your network. Because yes, a network kind of gets built over time. What are your thoughts on that, Golbie?
So if I understand the question, if you've been working in for many years and you're in an executive position, you likely have a network. So when you're in build mode, you're not necessarily building it. Is that the question?
That's yeah, because it seems like there's a question about a way to think about network that is about activating it in that time as opposed to.
Sure. I think it might be just semantics and nuance, whatever works for you. I mean, I would say that, we learn that we're always growing. The brain is the structural and functional correlate of the mind, right? And so neuroplasticity has told us that we're constantly creating new neural pathways. Our brain is constantly changing. And so we're constantly learning and we're constantly growing. We constantly have an opportunity to build. And so there are times when you might be in a situation where you haven't anticipated it and you realize you actually don't have the support you need and you need to build it, even if you have 20 years of executive experience, especially because to Rich's earlier question around awareness, some people are just starting to wake up. This movement of Black Lives Matter is waking people up to things that they may not have confronted before, and they might not have the internal resources or the external support to confront some of those really tough existential questions. And so you're always in a process of building, but absolutely activate what you got when you need it.
Well, and that's a nice bridge to one of the other questions that came in around the nodes of influence. That was a really interesting concept. And the question really is, can you give examples finding the nodes of influence and creating leverage from the lowest in the level of the organization and moving up?
So give examples. So a lot of times, and this is slightly more, it does depend what your org structure is. And so if you take a more traditional org structure where there's a hierarchy, The people at the top or in the bigger roles, so to speak, tend to have more access to context, more information, more decision-making power. They know the directionality of the firm or where you're going. And then it's about cascading things down. But what I've learned is sometimes things don't cascade down, they get stuck, whether it's information or whether it's skills, whether it's like a new direction that the company is going to go in. And so people who are more junior are left being like, what is going on? I don't feel valued. I can't get my voice heard. I don't even know what they're doing. And so it's about finding people, again, this comes back to this leadership concept. Everyone has the capacity to lead. You might not be in the most senior role, but that doesn't mean you're not a leader. I know people who are junior, but they can command a room and they can influence people more senior to them to think about something differently. So it's like if you're trying to find a node of influence because you want to activate your employee base, you might look and see who's starting the employee resource group. Who's the person who can assemble other people, who can get them rallied around something and excited. Go to them, take them to coffee, tell them what you're trying to do, listen to their feedback, get them on board, help them evangelize for you from the bottom up, because really systemic work or systemic change or change management in an org, and especially a complex org level, it needs the bottom up and the top down. And it's this constant calibration and intersection of those two forces. So it'd be looking for people that have the capacity to influence or that contain a lot of power in terms of their work product and getting them on board. And you find that at all levels. So that, and ideally that's where things organically can take hold, because it's not a directive, it's not the boss saying, well, you have to do this. It's the people realizing how it's powerful and rallying people around that same cause.
Beautiful. And I think one example that we both have experienced in our separate organizations, because as you all remember, Golbie worked at BlackRock. I used to work at Google. I used to run executive education. We both, this is why Golbie and I connected and became friends, is because we were both trying to bring in mindfulness practices, for example, into those organizations where culturally it kind of makes sense, but it kind of doesn't, right? And still to this day, it's sometimes hard for people to kind of like really try to promote things like mindfulness, emotional intelligence. And it was a lot of the participants from those extended networks, that kind of bottom-up effort that really caught the attention of upper management. When we talk about Search Inside Yourself, our program that we created at Google, my friend Meng started this and brought together experts, and then all of a sudden, like a number of engineers got really into it and a number of employees, and then leadership started to hear about it, and then it became kind of a thing that was there.
The same thing happened at BlackRock. I was
Right.
leading meditation in New York City, which was the headquarters where I was based. And there was a woman, Colleen, I'll never forget. And she got transferred to the Princeton office. And she was telling everyone about it in Princeton. And they were like, well, we want it. I was like, okay, I got to figure out how do we make it linked. And then people just started to talk about it. And through word of mouth, it spread. And that's how it got to 31 offices. So people are actually, if something aligns with who they are, what they need, what they believe in, a sense of purpose, you can actually really activate your employee base to move it in a cultural direction or in a business direction. It's about being able to meet people in the language that resonates with them at the time that resonates.
Yes, thank you. Good. And so maybe just at the very end here, you've offered us a lot of amazing solutions and productive ways to think about different phases we might be in. But from your perspective, to this last question that's being asked here, what are some of the top struggles you think, and this is a big set of questions, what are some of the top struggles that you think leadership is facing now with COVID? And what do you find are some of the common struggles there?
Yeah, with COVID and in America right now, it's also some of the racial oppression and injustice that's just getting a lot of due attention. I would say the struggles are really in those buckets. In the leading self struggles, it's individuals balancing their own well-being while trying to keep their company afloat. I'm in Silicon Valley right now, and there are a lot of companies that have they're not the big established institutions with really robust balance sheets. These are people that don't have potentially a lot of runway. They need to keep their company alive. And so they're trying to make the best business decisions, but they also want to do it in the most humane way. And that is a tension. The leading self part, the thing that executives are struggling with, is they're also going through this. They're also scared. They also could get COVID. They might have a family member that has COVID. They might have enough. I mean, I know executives that have family members that have cancer, family members that have COVID, family members that have lost their jobs, that are having marital issues. And so they are going through the human experience. And then in some of those companies where they're a little bit more buttoned up, people might not know. And so they look at them in their leadership position and kind of forget that they're also human, and that they also might go home and just bawl their eyes out because they're like, how can I deal with everyone else's stress and my own? So that's the leading self bucket, is people are having human experiences, but not everyone has the space to deal with it. In the leading others, it's people, the challenge I see a lot of people show up with is the more diverse your organization, the more diverse their needs. And how do you say the right thing that doesn't hurt some people? I'm thinking about this mostly in terms of Black Lives Matter right now, is people have good intentions and they say the wrong thing because they just don't know. They don't know what the right language is. They don't know what the right action is. Or the challenge in the leading organizations is the allocation of resources and the timing. And the fact that crises are hard to manage. They're hard. And so, we can sometimes forget that things take time, and leaders need to sleep and wake up and then, give their kids breakfast, and then they have to come back to solving the problems. And so I think it's this general impatience of everyone wants system level change done yesterday. A forgetting that limited resources is a reality for certain organizations. An overlook potentially that not everyone knows the right things to say, but are trying their best. And ultimately, sometimes the struggle is a lack of compassion for the people that are all going through it in different ways. And so ultimately, hopefully we can recognize, again, more than anything, is just the common humanity that we all have, and start at that part of leading self. And more than that, start at the inner journey, to do the inside job, what matters to me, why. How do I align and build integrity around it? How do I show up from that place of integrity and authenticity so that I can influence others, and can influence organizations, so that ultimately we can navigate this time of crisis coherently, compassionately, and with a positive outcome.
So beautifully said, Golbie. Thank you. And thank you for pointing us to our common humanity, which really underlies all of this. So thank you so much for your brilliant and beautiful work, sharing it with our community. This recording will be available to you all who've registered here. You'll probably find it on our website too, which is siyli.org. And Golbie will be around our community. Golbie will be officially in an advisory capacity to us here at SILI. So you'll probably see more of her in the time to come. Thank you so much, Golbie. And you can see in the chat bar a lot of the gratitude flowing in from around the world. So insightful, so powerful. Thank you for this work. Thank you for being who you are.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking an hour to spend with me, everyone.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.